When I was a child, I had a cousin, then my uncle passed away. He was 12, and I believe it was about 10. Fast forward, I'm 21. I lost my grandfather. In between there, I lost my great-grandfather. And then when I was in my early 30s, I started having children. I had a miscarriage. I had a stillborn birth. I lost my mother-in-law, and I lost my dad, all within about a 5-year period. And it was pretty tough. It was a really hard time for me. And I just became interested in death soon after my father passed away from colon cancer at 50. And I knew that if I didn't start to go through my own stuff, that I was probably going to pass away. My dad, I believe, had like a passive suicide in some ways, just because he couldn't confront his past. And I knew if I didn't start doing that, that I was probably going to end up like him. So that got me on a path towards spirituality, for lack of a better word. And I ended up, I guess I've been following Carolyn Myss for almost 30 years. And there, when I would go to retreats with her, there was a lot of near-death experiencers. And these people just had a certain vibe about them. I can't explain it. I ended up going to a school called Holos University Graduate Seminary, HUGS, which was started by Norm Shealy and Carolyn Myss. And there I started taking classes. I was just going to get a certification. Certification became a THM, a master's in theology. And then I decided, well, I'm having a great time here. I'm going to do my master's in near-death experience, just because I had just met so many near-death experiences. And I just felt like they had they had touched something that most of us don't get. And I ended up using a test called the 5-Factor Wellness Inventory that has a normative population. So I took 78 near-death experiencers and tested them against a holistic normative population. And the near-death experiencers were much more well-rounded, way beyond what the normative population was. So that's kind of how I got interested. And then a few years ago, I saw something about certified death midwife being offered. And I thought that was a perfect thing for me because I also was a volunteer for hospice. My last patient was actually a terminally ill 2-year-old. I got to spend about 18 months with that family, and it was so rewarding to watch. Mom was, of course, very angry that her daughter was going to pass away. But by the time the daughter did pass away, she had kind of reconciled and let go. And it was just a really good experience to watch. It was hard to watch, especially with my history, but it was just a phenomenal experience. And that's kind of how I started to fall into certified death midwife. It just kind of popped up and I'm like, oh, I need to do that.
What was the most surprising or rewarding part of becoming a midwife?
There can be really a lot of beauty in death itself. As part of our training was how to shroud a body. You bathe the body, you bless the body, you can put flowers within the shroud on top of the person's body. It's just a beautiful experience. And I think we don't get that personalization when you go to a funeral home. Kind of everybody, you hand over your beloved to somebody who's going to take them in the back and make them look, the way that they looked when they were alive, which I don't understand. But what I think is so rewarding about that is that you just get to spend your last moments with your beloved. You get to honor them and love them like no other. I believe it's a process of going through grief. Grief is the rawest form of love there is out there, and there's really nowhere for it to go. And I think that's part of why it's so painful, because we have all this love within us and we really have no one to give it to anymore.
What is your role as a midwife, and how do you help people through that grief or understanding their love for the person that they lost or are losing?
In my experience, it's about holding space for either the family, for the person who's, maybe passing. It's not about being the expert or anything. It's just about being available, whether that's just holding a container of love or grace, for lack of a better word. And it's also about, sometimes emotions come up, and those are things that you just have to deal with. And you have to make it about either the person who is passing away, what their wishes are. And that's part of the process of being a certified death midwife, is that we have a little book, a really thick book, and we sit down with the person if we're able to. We ask, who do you want at your funeral? Who is not allowed to come? What are your wishes? just so that it's all laid out. And so no one in the family has to make any decisions. It's just kind of a nice way to make it easy on the family once you do pass.
How do you hold space? What does it look like to hold space?
For me, a holding space is more of a feeling. It's more of holding a space of grace and love, a container, if you will. And whatever happens within that container is fine. It's also, there's not a right way to grieve. There's not a right way to die. So pretty much anything goes. As a certified death midwife, you do have to be ready for anything that comes up. A lot of times there is tension in the family. I don't want to impose my thoughts and judgments within the family. My hope is to turn it back to the family or to the person who is passing away and let their inner healer, their inner wisdom guide them in whatever is their right choice.
How do you work as an advocate for patients who are either less likely to open up to you or who can't communicate in traditional ways anymore?
I think they see us as kind of neutral territory, if you will. And, that's the same thing I think that I was finding in hospice was that I was neutral. I wasn't there to judge. And that's the same thing when you're going into it as a certified death midwife. It's really not about me. It's not about what I think is right or wrong, because really what is right and what is wrong? That's the question. What I might seem right for me isn't going to be right for you, maybe vice versa. So I think that's the biggest thing, is to go in there when you're advocating, is to not judge and let the family or the person who is passing away decide what needs to be done, and then advocate for whatever their wishes are.
Now that you're a midwife, what do you wish you had known when you were grieving your losses before having this formal education?
My biggest regret, I think, I don't want to say it's a regret, because I think at that time I lost my daughter stillborn was at 33 weeks. So she was beautiful and perfect in every way. She just didn't take her first breath. And when I was in the hospital, they gave us some time to hold her, but I can't even tell you how long that was. But I did remember thinking at that moment that there wasn't enough time in the world for me to hold her, because I never wanted to give her up. And I remember letting her go and leaving the hospital that very same day and coming home, and the next 3 days were just a blur. And now I look at that and I think, gosh, had I had a certified death midwife, it would have been such a wonderful experience to bring her home, to be able to give her first bath, to hold her, to bless her. And when we were ready, in a day or 2 or 3, have her cremated. We had her cremated at that time. And, there's a lot of really cool things that you can do with cremation. You can go in with the body. Sometimes they'll allow you to hit the button to start the furnace. Sometimes they'll give you a box. You can decorate the box. Had I known then what I know now, I think it would have been much more healing, because it's just something you just don't ever get over. You don't ever get over the death of a child, in my opinion.
And as a midwife, is it your responsibility to know those policies for the family? How does that work out?
It's not so much about, policy meaning, in the hospitals have policies. They're not necessarily laws that have to be followed to the letter. There are laws out there, that you have to follow to the letter regarding, the disposal of human remains and things like that. But there's funeral homes that have policies. I believe in Michigan, I think they're one of 7 or 8 states that have to have funeral director as part of a burial. My understanding is that the funeral directors some of them have policies where they have to be present if somebody wants to have a home burial, and others will allow the death midwife to do that and then work with her. And then it's a kind of a gray area. There is a book called Final Rights, and it lists all the states and what their laws are regarding death and burial. It's a great resource. The other thing that I find too, as a certified death midwife, that people always think there's and you have to be embalmed. That's a necessity, and that's not true. People don't realize that there are alternatives besides burial or cremation. There's, I know what they call flameless cremation, which is alkalizing hydrolysis. There is mycoremediation, where I believe it was Luke Perry, when he passed away, that was how he was buried, was in a mushroom suit. There's recomposting, where you can have your body basically turned into soil. So there's a lot of different alternatives out there. I just don't think that it's really not broadcast out there. And cremation really is bad for the environment. I believe it's like one body is the same as driving 3,200 miles in a car.
What do you wish you had known when you were younger and going through all of these grieving processes? What information would have been helpful?
I think the grief process would have been, to understand what that is, that so much of our society, you're 6 weeks and you're going to be quote unquote all better. It doesn't work like that. I know when I lost my daughter, it took me a good 5 years to really have her death anniversary come around and not feel like I was going to fall apart. And part of that healing for me was to learn to, okay, when her death anniversary was going to come up, I would actually like go to the spa or something, just so it wasn't such a day that was just, I love remembering her even now. It was just so hard those first 5 years. It was just so devastating and no one wanted to talk to me about it. And it's like, a lot of the thing I felt like was I was getting, I'm not, directly, but it's like, you should be over this by now. And it's like, no. And I've talked to other parents who've lost children as well. And you really don't ever get over it. You learn to manage it and you learn to live with it, but it doesn't ever really go away. And, just like losing our parents, they never really go away either.
What is the importance of the death anniversary?
For me, it was honoring, not only was she born on that day, but she also died on that day. And it was just a way for me to honor who she was, what she meant to me in my life. And it was a way of processing my grief, I think, in some ways, but it was also just a lovely way to remember and to be sad, and to give myself permission to be sad for that day. If I wanted to be messy that day, I let myself be messy that day. And that's really freeing, is that, that I can sit with my emotions and still know that I'm going to be okay at the end of the day. It's going to be rough for a while, but I will get through it. I can't go around my emotions. I have to go through them to really process them.
Have you noticed that as you have been going through this educational and experiential process of being a midwife, have the people around you also changed how they feel about death and dying and grieving?
Yeah, I think my children are much more comfortable with it than I ever was. And I know, we've had a ton of dogs and pets through the years, and that has been a really good opportunity to teach about death. And, we actually had our last dog that passed away, we had an angel vet come to the house and put her down. And that was like the best experience. And I think it was a really good experience for the kids as well, to see the dying process in an animal that they love. And, that it wasn't scary or anything. It was actually quite peaceful, and it was really quite beautiful.
When a patient comes to a midwife, have they typically accepted their own death and mortality, or is part of your process working through that with them, or does it vary?
It varies. It's definitely a very mixed bag. And there are people that I feel like are very comfortable. And that was kind of what I really enjoyed about working with hospice patients, was that they have such a different mindset than most other people. There were people that were very angry, but there were few and far between. Most were very accepting of death, and that they were terminal and they were in hospice and they were going to make the most of their time with their family and their life. And they just have this different energy, vibe. I don't even know what to call it. It's just more accepting of life and where they're at and what's happening. And a lot of things that they used to worry about, they've told me just kind of fall away when they realize it's just not worth it.
What would you recommend families do to prepare for death? Like, what's the easiest way to transition?
Like for me, I'm 57. I've already started talking to my kids about my death, what I want, what I don't want, what music I want, what I want done with my body. I'm an organ donor, so if there's some kind of accident and I can, my parts are old, but if somebody can get some use out of them, why not? Please donate my organs. So I think that starting the discussion early, regardless of whether you're dying or not, because the truth is we're all going to die. But I think it was Ben Franklin who said the only thing that's certain in life is death and taxes. So, those two things are going to happen. Why not start talking about them early on so that when you're in the active process of dying, those decisions are already made and that people aren't scrambling. The other thing is if you're not able to make your wishes known, then it's just a guess for the family. And that's sometimes very, very hard. I think that's kind of the myth or the superstition is that people think, well, if I talk about my death, then maybe I'm going to be, hit by a truck or there's some kind of accident or I'm going to fall over from a heart attack. And that's our mind getting in the way of our hearts.
How do people typically find you and how do you become their midwife?
There's several ways. One, kind of word of mouth through hospice. There also is I believe there's a website that we have that has a list of all the certified death midwives nationally. It's interesting because I think people just find you. I have had a couple doulas, mostly it's doulas that come find me because they understand the process. I had a woman, I believe in California, who asked me, her grandmother was here and she said, could you spend some time with my grandmother, just talking to her and reassuring her and talking about death, because a lot of the time the family didn't want to do it. And I was happy to do that for her.